Yeah.
No.
Okay.
It's
You can
on
do
now.
that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, I did something kind of cool recently, which is I decided to do my presentation on Ya'juj wa Ma'juj with a guy named Ryan in Texas who's a Christian. He's Christian, but he doesn't believe Jesus is the Son of God literally, or one with God in a Trinity, or any of that kind of nonsense. He's more like a Muslim Christian is the best way I know how to describe him. But he's very interested in what I'm teaching you all. So he wanted me to come on his show and teach it. So this will be on his YouTube channel soon, most of the stuff that we're talking about. So if you don't want to go through the process of trying to log into Zoom and rewatch these, inshallah, you'll be able to go to YouTube soon, and I'll share the link with you all. Okay, so without further ado, tonight we're going to be talking about some other major signs of the hour. Now, these are unfortunately classified as last signs of the hour, and what I'm trying to show you all is that's an incorrect classification. So most of the imams that you encounter are going to teach you that these major signs are the last things to come. But what I'm clearly showing you is that they're not. They're actually happening right now, and they've been happening, but not all of them yet. Like the descent of Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus the son of Mary, that has not happened yet. That still has yet to occur. But Dajjal is here. Gog and Magog are here. And I'm going to show you that some of the other signs are also here tonight, inshallah. So without further ado, let's get through. We talked about Dajjal and the flying donkey. Okay, so this is very important hadith. You should all memorize this. The companions were all sitting around. Okay, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu salamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, tasliman kathira. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma rabbana zidna ilma ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla wa anta taj'alul hazna idha shi'ta sahla. So the companions are all sitting around talking about the signs of the hour. Me and you right now are fulfilling a sunnah of our religion that is not, unfortunately, being fulfilled by most of our brothers and sisters today, which is to sit around talking about signs of the hour. And the Prophet ﷺ came to them and he said, "What are you doing?" They said, "We're talking about the signs of the hour." So he said, "Let me tell you about 10 signs of the hour." So he tells you Dajjal, the false Messiah, the Antichrist, Gog and Magog, Ya'juj wa Ma'juj, Dukhan, the smoke. And that's going to become very important next week when we talk about the mountain of gold under the Euphrates River, because it's directly connected to Dukhan, which is connected to Al-Malhama Al-Kubra, the Great War or Armageddon. But it's such a important sign that it requires an entire class to talk about. Dabbatul-Arid, the beast of the earth. The sun rising from the west. The three caving ends of the earth, or the three sinkings of the earth. One in the east, one in the west, one in Arabia. So that's 3 signs. A fire that would come out of Yemen that would drive people to their place of judgment. And the son of Mary would descend. Okay, so there's 10. These are the 10. They call them 10 major signs. In reality, every sign is major, guys. Don't think that these are like more important than any other sign. I believe these are all mentioned in one single hadith because they will all be kind of contemporaneous. They'll happen more or less around the same time. And we're living in that age in which we can see them manifesting. So let's talk about the sun rising from the west. Now, most of you, tell me how you know about this sign. What do they usually say when they tell you this sign? You tell me.
But it's the very last thing to happen. Like
right.
When the sun rises from the west, it's over. It's Yom Qiyamah.
Right. Okay. So here we have a sign that, from appearances, it's pretty literal, okay? Except that we know something. The sun doesn't rise from the west, guys. It never, ever rises from the west. Never. Always rises from the east. If you don't believe me, tomorrow morning, when you get up to pray Fajr, inshallah, go outside and look to the west and see if you tell me if you see a sun rising there. And of course, none of you are going to do that because you know that's a complete waste of time. You know that the sun doesn't rise from the west. And the Quran confirms that for us. In Surah Al-Baqarah, we find this ayah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Qala Ibrahim. So Ibrahim said to a tyrant king, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ فَأْتِ بِهَا مِنَ الْمَغْرِبِ. If you're such a powerful king, O oppressive king, my God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He causes the sun to rise from the east. You cause it to rise from the west. So this is Ibrahim's challenge in the Quran to a tyrant king. Which, if you don't know this particular section of Surah Al-Baqarah, the first thing the tyrant says is I'm someone who causes life and death. So he brings a man who's on death row and he frees him, and then he brings another man and kills him. So so Ibrahim's first point is that Allah causes life and gives death to people, and the king shows that he can do the same thing. So then Ibrahim's telling him, okay, well, here's something I know that you can't do. Do you understand? That king cannot do this because it's impossible. It will never, ever happen. And if it does happen, ever, it will totally contradict this ayah. Do you guys understand that? If there ever is a day in the future that comes and the sun rises from the west, that means this ayah of the Quran would be wrong, totally wrong and nonsensical, because it is in fact true that the sun can rise from the west. And who's to say that this king didn't cause it? Guys, never, ever, ever, ever misunderstand one very important point about methodology for interpreting hadith. A hadith cannot contradict the Quran, because the Quran is the highest level of knowledge we have. It is the most authentic thing we have from God, period. There's nothing inauthentic in the Quran, period. Nothing. Zero. It is preserved. It is protected. وَإِنَّهُ لَحَافِظُونَ, Allah says about it in the Quran. Allah has taken it upon Himself to protect it. And not only that, you don't even read these ayat without saying what first?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
Right. Do you do that with hadith? No. I've never heard anyone say before they read a hadith, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. So how do you know you're not being taken for a ride by the shaitan with your hadith studies? Because we recognize that the Quran is something very special, that no other area of knowledge can contradict this book. No matter how authentic a hadith is, it cannot contradict the Quran. So if the Quran is our judge of hadith and not vice versa, then we don't take hadith and extrapolate meaning from them that goes against the Quran. The other way is how we look at things. The Quran is like our glasses that we put on to see the world as it really is. So that being said, guys, let's bring another ayah if it isn't blatantly clear enough to you that the sun is...
Sheikh, I just have a question.
Sure.
So, you're saying here that this ayah of the Quran, in which Ibrahim says that Allah brings the sun from the east. So you're saying that this ayah means that the hadith that says the sun is gonna come from the west, you're saying that hadith has to be interpreted metaphorically because of this ayah?
Yes, you have no option actually.
But how do you know that? Just a question. Because I want to understand. How do you know that? It says "Qala Ibrahim." أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق. that Ibrahim said that Allah brings the sun from the east, how do you know that that means he's always going to do that? Like, why can't we say that on Yawm al-Qiyamah, Allah will bring the sun from the west?
What relevance would this ayah, or what relevance would this sign be to you if it's something that only happens on Yom Qiyamah?
What do you mean?
In other words, what would even be the point of the prophet telling you about this sign? All the other signs are things you and I are going to have to deal with. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
Okay. What would be the point in him telling us a sign that we're never even, nobody's going to have to deal with it? It happens at the very end of the world when all the humans are going for judgment anyway. What would be the point of him even warning us about it? If it's the very last event in history.
Well, what I've heard from other sheikhs is that like when the sun comes from the west, like based on what they say that that's going to be Yawm al-Qiyamah, like when you see the sun rising from the west, then there's no more istighfar. Like it's over. Like whatever you did, there's no more forgiveness. That's what they say, correct?
Right. I'm not disagreeing with what they're saying as much as I'm saying, ask yourself a question. What would be the point in the prophet telling you about a sign lumped in with a bunch of other signs that will actually be affecting large numbers of people, except for this sign is really only for a very final last group of human beings who are just going to see this thing happen and immediately the day of judgment is going to stop.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, because it wouldn't really give us something to...
It's irrelevant to us then. Why did he just say, like, okay, the end of the world's going to start, and why even mention the sun rising from the west? I mean, it's really irrelevant for him to even tell us.
But
because the day of judgment is immediately following it. Snap, it's there.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. It's at that point there's nothing we can really do, like, because there's no more. Like it's over basically. I get that, but at the same time, I mean, hasn't the Prophet ﷺ described like what's gonna happen, like when we stand before Allah and all those things?
Right,
like,
but that group of signs has nothing to do with that. Would you agree with me? He's not telling you about the day of judgment with those signs. He's telling you about things you and I are actually going to have to deal with.
Like the actual like judging of Allah and standing there with everyone and all of that.
Right. None of that, the descent of Jesus, the Dajjal, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, I mean, none of that has to do with any of that, of the day of judgment stuff. We're talking about dunya things. These are all signs in the dunya. They're not signs of the akhirah, in other words. But the thing that should really cause you to question is that Ibrahim says, Inna Allaha ya'ti bishams min al-mashriq. He doesn't say, wal maghrib. He doesn't include the maghrib. He's without, I mean, if you read between the lines, he's basically saying Allah doesn't cause the sun to rise from the west. So you cause it to rise from the west. It's negating even the possibility that that would ever happen if you read between the lines of the ayah. But let me give you another ayah to support what I'm saying, okay? So Allah says in Surah Al-Rum, لا تبديل لخلق الله ذلك الدين القيم, that there is no change in the creation of Allah. Allah has what are called like sunan, like an established way that he has created a pattern in which the universe works, and it doesn't change, okay? So the idea that the sun would rise from the west is a humongous change in the creation. Now, some of you are going to go, Brother Isa, I read this article on NASA's website, and they said that there's going to be this thing called a polar shift, and the Earth's going to stop spinning, and it's going to... Who is NASA, guys? Who is NASA? NASA, this is the same organization that imported Nazi German scientists after World War II under something called Project Paperclip to come to the United States and be a part of our program, our NASA program. NASA, the same organization that hired Jack Parsons. Remember Jack Parsons, who performs satanic rituals with prostitutes in order to contact the Antichrist? The same man who invented the rocket fuel to help get all the satellites up in the air for NASA. Guys, NASA is the biggest lying, Dajjalic organization on earth. I could spend 4 classes telling you all the lies that NASA tells. So don't take your dean from NASA, guys. If NASA tells you that there's something called a pole shift, you should immediately assume that there's no such thing as a pole shift, because everything that comes out of their mouth is lies. But I won't try to convince you much more about NASA. The point I'm trying to make to you all is that, guys, because it's highly unlikely that the sun will ever rise from the west, then what is the prophet trying to tell us? He's trying to tell us about a false sunrise. Or another interpretation that I incline towards is a time in history in which the world becomes inverted, in which up becomes down, right becomes left, or as we like to say, right becomes wrong, and the liar is called truthful, and rain becomes burning or acidic, and children become filled with rage, just like we talked about before. The inverted world of the future, because Dajjal is Al-Masih Dajjal. He's the inversion of the Messiah. So the Messiah, who's incredibly spiritual, will be impersonated by a very materialistic Dajjal, right? So the sign of the sun rising from the west, like I said, it can mean 2 things. One of them is not that the sun will actually rise from the west, guys. It can mean A, that there'll be a false sunrise, okay? So when we talked about Gog and Magog, and we talked about the stages of Dajjal, we talked about how Dajjal used modern what civilization? Western civilization to conquer the world. And modern Western civilization to spread his technology all over the earth that's going to allow him to have godlike powers. Not actual powers like God, but only a cheap imitation of God's powers. And it is Western civilization today that is primarily worshipped by Eastern peoples. Everyone in the East wants to be like the West. They look to the West for inspiration. They look to the West because of its supreme technology and its advancements in science. And they go to the West, right, to get educated and get citizenship and get, we all know this. This is not anything new for you all. In fact, probably some of your parents are in the United States for those very reasons that I mentioned. It's as if the sun is rising from the west. And I'll give you a good example of how you can see this in nature. There's this phenomenon amongst plants. Like plants will actually lean towards light, and in the morning they'll lean towards the sun rising from the east, and then they'll gradually turn throughout the day. So it's as if humanity, which used to focus its attention on the east, right? For most of history, the east was from which most of the amazing advancements in philosophy and technology and medicine and so forth and so on. That's where it came from, until Dajjal enters Western civilization and creates modern Western civilization. I actually want to stop here and say a caveat. There's nothing evil or wrong with Western civilization, guys. There's nothing wrong with the history of the British people or the French people. No. You got to make a distinction between when Dajjal enters Western civilization and creates modern Western civilization. Modern Western civilization has the phenomenon of crusader mentality. of colonization, of the Enlightenment, right? Which is where they tried to remove God and the ethics of religion from human life so that scientific advancement can skyrocket exponentially high because there's no longer any morals to govern how scientific experimentation takes place. So modern Western civilization that created the technological world that we have today all over the earth, this is the Dajjalic civilization of Gog and Magog. And it has created a false sunrise, a metaphorical sunrise in the Western world. Okay. And then the other meaning, if I can explain it better, is that there will be an inversion of reality that takes place in the end times, along contemporaneously with Dajjal and Gog and Magog and the rest. And we mentioned the signs that indicate an inverted future, right? Men marrying men, women marrying women instead of the traditional marriage, right? Children, as opposed to being born with mom and dad, are born out of wedlock, right? Yakfur olad zina is the hadith. So the most children will be born without married parents, right? Which is a very strange world compared to the most of history. Very, very, the word in Arabic, id, to have children outside of marriage in the pre-modern world. Very strange. Not today, guys. Over 50% of couples in America having children without being married. So it indicates to us an inverted world in the future, an inverted world as if the sun rose from the west. Okay. Why am I teaching you this? Because I don't want you guys to sit on the couch asleep until you die thinking like, oh, end the world's not here, because I haven't actually seen with my eyes the sun rising from the west. That's the mentality I'm trying to change in you guys from these classes. Is that if Dajjal and Gog and Magog and all these things are just something that happens at the very, 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 very end of time, then me and you can just go to sleep. Because who cares? The Prophet said this hadith only for some group of people in the distant future that are all going to see this stuff happen all within a few years, and they'll deal with it. Me and you, we can just pray 5 times a day and build masajid and build soup kitchens and khalas. We're going to Jannah. No, guys, this stuff is all happening right in front of your faces. And if the Muslims don't wake up to this, they're going to stay asleep. And it's having a very, very negative impact on our iman, because a lot of this stuff just sounds like Disneyland. Like billions of people living underground somewhere behind some barrier that we even though we've seen the whole earth basically with satellite technology, there must be there somewhere, right? One-eyed Cyclops that's so large that he can step in the ocean and it only wets his ankles, and he can hop up and down between the heavens and the earth, and he's gonna, guys, we can't keep thinking like this. We have to ask ourselves, we know our prophet is not a liar. We know that he said the truth. So then what did he mean by these things? That's the importance of these classes. The beast of the earth. Dabbatul-Arid. Now this one, we're going to have to put on our thinking caps. This by far is probably the most difficult sign for me, because the information we have about Dabbatul-Arid is very hard to decipher. So where do we find this term in the Quran? So in Surah An-Nahl, Allah says, وَإِذَا وَقَعَ الْقَوْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَخْرَجْنَا لَهُمْ دَابَّةً مِنَ الْأَرْضِ تُكَلِّمُهُمْ أَنَّ النَّاسَ كَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا لَا يُقِنُونَ. Which means, and when the decree of the hour comes to pass against them, we will bring forth for them a beast from the earth, which will talk to people, telling them that the people had no sure faith in our revelations. But that's not the only place we find this term. So here it's termed as Dabbatul min al-Ard, so the beast from the earth. But we also find this term used in another place in the Quran. So once again connected to Sulaiman alayhi salam. So I remember, if I haven't mentioned it yet, I think I did. Whenever you read about Sulaiman in the Quran, you should be thinking about Dajjal. Because who does Dajjal want to sit on his throne? He wants to sit on the throne of Sulaiman. And Dajjal will also attempt to impersonate all of the powers that Allah gave to Sulaiman, because Sulaiman has a special kingdom and he makes a special dua that no one gets his kingdom. So in order for Dajjal to impersonate the real Messiah, he needs to be able to do the things that Sulaiman was able to do in order for the Jews to believe in him. فَلَمَّا قَضَيْنَا عَلَيْهِ الْمَوْتِ. So when we decreed for Sulaiman death, مَا دَلَّهُمْ عَلَى مَوْتِهِ إِلَّا دَابَّةُ الْأَرْضِ تَأْكُلُ مِنْ سَأَتَهُ. So nothing revealed to the shayateen who were working for Sulaiman, which is the kind of parentheses here, or the jinn, that he was dead, except a beast of the earth who was eating away at his staff. What is staff in Arabic, for those of you that speak Arabic? Like a wooden stick, staff. What's it called?
Asa.
Asa. Okay. So Allah doesn't use that word here, even though he uses it for Musa. So Musa has a staff. It does amazing things. It splits the ocean. It turns into a snake. But he calls it Asa. The first thing that should come to our mind here is, why is Allah calling it min sa'ata or min sa'a? This is a different word, but it's being translated as staff. Okay. All right. So what we understand from these two is something about Dabbatul-Arid. So I'm going to go to a Facebook post I found that kind of goes over these ayat, because there's something important that we don't need to miss here. Are you guys familiar with riwayat? The different riwayat of Quran? So you probably may or may not know this, but you've heard since you were like a baby that there's only one Quran. But in reality, there's actually 7 Qurans. They're called ahruf. So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Allah revealed the Quran, and the Prophet made a special dua that he would also reveal it so that all of the Arab tribes could recite it the way they spoke Arabic, because there were different dialects of Arabic, just like today. Like here in Egypt, they say Yomul Gumu'ah. They don't say Yomul Jumu'ah. They don't pronounce ja, but it's an Arabic dialect, and it's probably one of the most famous because they produce all the television shows here that the rest of the Arabs watch. So the same was true during the time of the Prophet. Different Arab tribes spoke Arabic slightly differently, and they would actually use different words for the same thing. So for example, in English, we call pants in America, but in Britain they call them trousers. Okay, so they have a different word for the same thing, even though we're all speaking the same language. So these 7 ahruf were around during the time of the Prophet, but eventually when the Prophet ﷺ had left this world and the Khulafa Rashidin took over, confusion came into the Ummah about how to properly recite the Quran, because Ajmi people, non-Arabs, were becoming Muslim. And of course, they had to learn how to pray, and they had to learn how to lead Salat, and they were making mistakes in their recitation. And when the Muslims would go fight in jihad, all of the Ummah, Ajmi, wal Arab, they would all fight together. And then when they would pray, it would create like confusion, because the Arab people would correct the Ajmi people, and the Ajmi people would argue with them and say, no, we're reciting the Quran correctly. And it created a big fitna. So Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh, he decided to make a mushaf, standard copy of the Quran. And he chose only one of the ahruf, which was the Qurayshi dialect of Arabic, to write the mushaf in. And then that mushaf was dispersed in 7 copies throughout the Muslim empire. Okay? And that was the one standard copy from that point until today that Muslims memorized the Quran from. What became of the other ahruf? They were recorded in books, basically hadith books, and continued to be recited by some companions and taught to students. And so today we have something called qira'at, which are the different recitations of Quran. You may have heard of Hafs, which is the one most of you know, or Warsh, which is primarily used in West Africa. And it's the same Quran, but there may be some slight pronunciation differences in some of the words, or there may be a change in pronouns at some point in a text. Nothing that would, in my estimation, contradict the text of the Quran. But as ulama have explained, it just simply expands on the meaning. Why am I telling you this whole complicated story about how the Quran came to us today? Because when we look into the recitations of the Quran, we find from Ibn Abbas a story about this particular verse of the Quran, talking about Dabbatul-Arid. Okay, so I'm just going to read the screen for you guys. It has been mentioned in the authentic sayings of the Prophet that a time will come when Jesus alayhi salam will descend to the earth and he will stay, he will fight basically the Dajjal. And at that time, the other signs will occur, okay? And one of them is the beast of the earth mentioned in the Quran. And here they have the ayah. Now, the word here, it will speak to them, we find in the Arabic text from my presentation, okay? Tukallimuhum, tukallimuhum. It will speak to them. However, when we go to the tafsir of this ayah, we find Ibn Abbas and a few other scholars mention that it will speak to them, tukallimuhum, but that also there's another riwayah of this ayah in which it says taklimuhum, it will speak to them. And this was the recitation of Ibn Abbas, who is the greatest mufassir of Quran that's ever lived, because the Prophet made dua for him that he would understand the Quran. So how did Ibn Abbas understand these differences? He said both are true, that Dabbatul-Arid will not only speak to people, but it will harm them. So taklimuhum, harm them, tukallimuhum, speak to them. So both are true. Then he went on to say, and he connected it to a hadith in which the Dabbatul-Arid will come and it will label the believers and disbelievers. So this is now not Quran anymore, this is hadith. So when the Dabbatul-Arid emerges on the earth, the Prophet said it will, let me find the place where it mentions that. Yes, so it will strike the nose of the disbelievers with its staff, and it will make the believers' faces bright with a ring, and people will gather around and they will recognize the believers from the disbelievers. Okay? So let's look at some other traditions. So what are the characteristics of the Dabbatul-Arid? So according to Ibn Zubayr, its head is like the head of a bull. Its eyes are like the eyes of a pig. Its ears are like the ears of an elephant. Its horns are like the horns of a horse. Its neck is like the neck of an ostrich. Its chest is like the chest of a lion. Its color is like the color of a tiger. Its haunches are like the haunches of a cat. Its tail is like the tail of a ram. Its legs. It sounds like Disney World, doesn't it, guys? Do we know of any animal like this? By the way, do we know of any animal that can talk to you in a language that you can understand? In other words,
parrot?
what I'm sorry.
A parrot?
Okay, I'll give you parrot. But what is a parrot? What is a parrot really doing? Is it speaking to you, or is it simply
No.
parroting back to you the sounds that it can imitate?
Yeah, that.
Okay, so if I say to anyone "itakallam" in Arabic, we all understand that that means I want you to speak intelligently to someone. Itakallam is not the same thing as tikrar, like repeat. There's a different word. So when Allah says it will speak to people, He means intelligently. Otherwise, He would have used a different word in the Quran. So what I'm trying to say, guys, is that remember our first principle. We should take the words literally unless we have a reason to go to a metaphorical interpretation. Okay? So now that we've established who Dajjal is, and we've established who Gog and Magog are, and we've established how we've also more or less come to some conclusions about the rising of the sun from the west. We can kind of understand now what's been happening is that Dajjal has used a group of people called Gog and Magog to infiltrate Western civilization and to change the agenda of Western civilization to a crusader colonial agenda and to remove spirituality and godlessness from the West, which used to be a profoundly religious civilization, by the way. Real Western civilization is Christian, okay? If you didn't know that already. And that godlessness, when you remove God and you remove a belief in the Day of Judgment, and you also inject the scientific, miraculous things that begin to happen in the West because the West now starts worshiping Dajjal, and we know from the hadith of Dajjal that when you start worshiping Dajjal, he starts giving you godlike abilities, or he gives you his godlike abilities. He causes it to rain. He brings forth fruits from the earth. He brings forth treasures from the earth, so forth and so on. Flying donkey, we all know the rest. So the modern Western civilization then conquers the world, becomes a technological empire in which the entire world now imitates. What is it doing? What is its end goal? Its end goal is to create a one world civilization in which the Dajjal can come and rule. Okay? Now, I'll tell you that Dabbatul-Arid is not a term that the Quran simply brings to us anew. Dabbatul-Arid comes from the Bible. The Bible talks about the beast in the book of Revelation, and most Christians understand immediately that this is not literal. And I appreciate that the Christian tradition tends to be a lot more metaphorical about their scriptures than Muslims are today, unfortunately. But they're an older deen, so they've had more time to think about their stuff than we have. If I could give us any excuse for not having understood these things differently up until this point. So they have this book called Revelation at the end of the Bible, and in it, it talks about the Antichrist, and it talks about most of the signs that we have as far as the major signs. And it mentions this beast that will assist the Antichrist. Okay? Very important detail that we cannot leave out. The beast will assist the Antichrist, the Dajjal. And it will be a number, okay? 666, or in another tradition of Revelation, 616. So the more authentic they say is 666. Because you guys know there's many different versions of books of the Bible. They're not all in agreement with each other. So the most important thing I want you guys to recognize is that the beast assists the Antichrist. Now, beasts in the Bible usually refer to nations. Okay? Nations. It's a metaphorical word used for a nation. And particularly a nation that operates on its desires and not on revelation from God. It is beast-like, animal-like. Like, for example, when Allah mentions the great schism between Eastern and Western Christianity in Surah Al-A'raf, by telling us the story of Bani Israel and the sect of them that began to break the law by fishing on the Sabbath. He says to them, Kunu qiradatan khasi'in, become apes, despised. So what is the one characteristic we notice about Western civilization is that it is primarily godless. Its morals are not derived from divine revelation, not from the Torah, not from the Injil, not from the Quran. And we notice that gradually Western civilization, which used to be profoundly religious and profoundly modest, gradually becomes more animalistic. In other words, today we literally have, primarily coming out of Western civilization, the most disgusting, heinous pornography that has ever existed on earth. Literally, like the prophet said, people having sexual intercourse in public like donkeys. That's what pornography is today. And we find that, especially in the Western world, I think it's upwards of like 98% of men are watching this stuff. It's like a really, really high number. And I think it's in the 80s for women. Alhamdulillah, in most of the Muslim countries, the stuff is banned to some extent, so it's a little more difficult to find. But unfortunately, even our own people are starting to watch this garbage. The dress code of the West begins to devolve very rapidly in the 19th and 20th century. Until now, we have the sign of the women who are dressed and yet naked. And by the way, that's a huge problem here in Egypt. I noticed here in Egypt, it's not really okay to walk around showing like your chest and your thighs and stuff like that. But you'll see, unfortunately, men and women wearing clothes here that are so tight, it looks like someone just took paint and painted on their body. It's just like you can, every crack and crevice of their body you can see in public. And everyone from small children to 90-year-old women. It's really quite disgusting. But that's because Western civilization has become beast-like, animal-like. And if you notice, and this is so interesting, what's the primarily foundational theory of the origin of life that came out of the West? What does it teach? That you are basically a monkey. Isn't that fascinating? Exactly like Allah said, Kunu qiradatan khasi'in, become apes, despised. So godless Western civilization, when they left revelation and they left God and they left everything and they said, well, we're just going to think about things for ourselves now. We're not going to listen to what God has to say. What's the conclusion they came to? We're all just monkeys, just really intelligent monkeys. And so since we're all monkeys and there is no God and there is no, the universe wasn't created and it's all random and it all popped into existence out of pure chance, well then it's just a dog eat dog world. Look at these animal metaphors that govern our, it's exactly because it's a beast-like civilization where human beings are just reduced to slightly more intelligent animals. And so a nation, a world governing nation emerges on the earth, a beast. But I'm going to tell you something even more interesting. Now, so far, I'm not teaching you something I learned from a teacher. The beast is something that I've had conclusions that I've come to my own. I'm totally okay with being wrong about them. And if you totally reject what I'm teaching you tonight about the beast, I'm okay. It's not going to hurt my feelings. But these are things that I have thought about and thought about and thought about for a long time. And these are the conclusions I've come to. The modern technological world, if you just step back and look at it, you see wires running all over the earth that make up the electrical grid that powers everything. Now, those wires are all connected to power plants that burn coal and oil and natural gas and that consume uranium. But to some small extent, they're also connected to the resources of geothermal heat, to wind energy, and to solar power. Okay? So those generators produce electricity, and that electricity goes into your home and allows you to turn on your lights, allows you to get on your laptop. And then through Wi-Fi signals and satellites, okay, all of the internet is connected all over the world in one giant grid. So the electrical systems are connected, and those power the technology that's all connected to the internet. So if you were able to see through the walls and you were able to see through all the plaster in your home and all of the structure of it, you would see this grid, electrical grid around you, all over your house, all over your neighborhood, all over your city. This giant electrical grid and this giant Wi-Fi internet grid. Okay? Now, if you're still following me, you also have the interconnected road system of the earth. So most of the roads in the earth, regardless of what nation, they connect to each other. And on those roads are cars transporting human beings and their belongings, and trucks transporting supplies to everyone. Okay? And it forms a grid over the earth. You also have the connected grid of the shipping channels all over the world. Now, let's look at the human body, or any animal for that matter. What do we find? We find different systems. We have a nervous system in which there's a brain connected to endless miles of nerves that run all throughout your body that tell the brain what's going on inside the rest of the body. We have a heart, okay, that pumps blood throughout the body to supply it with energy and nutrients. Okay? I think some of you are starting to understand what I'm trying to say. You see, modern Western civilization gave birth to a giant technological creature that has gradually, over the last 250 years, built itself over top of the earth. It has a brain called the internet that allows it to know what everybody's doing, the rest of the body. And it has, I don't even know if you want to call it a mouth or a digestive system, but it consumes the resources of the earth, the uranium, the natural gas, the oil, the coal, and the wind, solar, and geothermal energy of the planet. So I did some Google searching. I tried to find a picture that really illustrates what I'm trying to tell you guys. Yeah, here we go. So none of this is really what's in my head. And one day I'll find a cool picture that really illustrates it. But there's some things here that kind of get to the point of what I'm trying to say. See, here we have this giant grid over top of America of all the lights and everything connected. Now let's go back to our hadith. It sounds like Disneyland, okay? Where we have the beast being described as all this collection of all these animals and their abilities, okay? So if you're a pre-modern person, you're living in the middle of the desert, and the prophet is trying to describe to you the modern technological world, he's not going to say cell phone, internet, electricity, grid. He's not going to use any of these words because you wouldn't know them anyway, and he doesn't know them. Even if Allah had revealed them to him, he wouldn't know these words. But the Quran primarily uses words that the Arabs already knew, save a few. So how are you going to describe this technological grid beast thing that's all over the earth in the future that Dajjal is going to use to gather information about people and to control them? It's going to assist him. Is that you're going to describe it in terms that people of your time are going to remember and understand so that they can convey them properly to another generation and another generation until finally it gets to a people in the future who can then read it and interpret it. All the animals of the pre-modern world had abilities, okay? Special abilities, whether it was their size and strength like an elephant, or it was their speed like cats and lions and tigers, or it was their intelligence like or abilities like birds, the ability to fly, or animals that can dig deep within the earth. So when we look at the technology we have today, we not only can do everything the animals can do, which we previously could not, and we not only have more power than the most powerful animals, we're greater than them. So what I understand from this hadith is that it's saying that the beast itself will contain all of the powers of every animal that we know of and more. It's a combination of all those things put together. Okay? Now let's get back to the Quran and seal the deal on my interpretation that I'm giving you tonight. The beast will harm you and speak to you. Is the main thing the Quran wants us to know. And it emerges at a time in history in which mankind is rejecting the revelations of God. Now, I don't need to convince any of you guys that we live in that time, okay? And that we don't have any animals that are talking to us. So if my theory about the beast is true, does this beast, this technological grid, talk to you guys? Oh, yes, it does. In fact, I regularly open up the beast and talk to it all the time, and it speaks back to me. In fact, this thing knows me so well that it will actually recommend things to me. You guys ever heard of artificial intelligence? Yeah.
Yep, that's actually what I was thinking about.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And artificial intelligence is getting so good at, and by the way, it's not real intelligence. Never ever think that this thing will be like a human. It's impossible. Okay? It's only going to be artificial. It'll be so good to trick you into thinking it's intelligent. It's not really intelligent because it lacks the ruh, the spirit that every human being has in them. But I digress. This thing talks to you. And it will get more and more intelligent looking as time goes on. And this is just part of the beast, guys. This thing doesn't work without the rest of the beast. It doesn't work without the electricity. It doesn't work without the Wi-Fi. It doesn't work without the other parts of the creature that's on the earth. Okay? But more than that, what does this thing do to us? It makes you stupid. It's called the smartphone. But in reality, it takes away your intelligence. So you guys may not remember, but I remember a time when you actually got in a car and you drove places and this thing didn't talk to you the whole time and tell you where to go. You actually had to either A, know where you were going. In other words, in your head, you had a vision of how to get where you're going, or you had to use a map. It required more intellectual power for you to get from point A to point B than today when you just simply say 1045 Hillcroft Road, Brown Summit, North Carolina, 27214. And then you turn your mind off and this thing just tells you where to go. So it's not smart. It's taking away your ability to think. Not only that, but you can literally put on like a different spectrum of light and see how this thing is shooting energy into you all day long. In fact, you can open up most cell phones and there's a certain section under the settings where you can read the warnings about these things, how much radiation they put into your body. What is that doing to you guys? It's harming you. But what did the prophet say about the beast? That it will label you believer or disbeliever? Oh my goodness. Do you guys know what happened recently? Of course you do, because it was all over social media. I know you guys have Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. What happened recently is there was an application called, what's it called, guys? The Salat application? Muslim Pro. Who uses Muslim Pro? Is it Muhammad down the road that sells alcohol and doesn't pray? No, guys, it's people who have faith because they're concerned about prayer times and they want to pray on time because they know they have a covenant with Allah and they're responsible for 5 daily salawat. And they want to know where the masajid are so they can perform their prayers with other Muslims, other believers. Well, what we found out is that a non-Muslim guy actually created this program and that he was selling the location data, names and information of all the people who downloaded the app to primarily Western intelligence agencies, MI5, MI6, Mossad, the CIA, so that they could gather data about you and me, the believers who pray, because they want to know who's left on the earth that still cares about faith, because we got to get rid of these people. Because as long as they have faith, then they see with 2 eyes and they're going to read kafir on his forehead. And we got to get rid of these people because they might tell other people that kafir is on his forehead and then they're going to wake up too and see it also. So it is marking you and marking me as believer and disbeliever. It knows all the people who could care less about the Quran, care less about the Torah, care less about the Injil, and it knows every one of you that uses this thing to read the Quran. It knows every one of you that uses this thing to find out where the Qibla is. It knows every one of you who knows what the prayer times are. It knows the believers, and it has marked you. Your IP address, it's all on a server somewhere. What does a server sound a lot like, guys? It sounds a lot like your memory. I'm telling you guys, it's a beast. It is a creature that we have created that serves Dajjal. It is marking us. It is harming us. It is speaking to us. It has all the powers of all the animals. And it's even greater. And this beast is how the Dajjal will be able to produce godlike abilities, to make it rain, to make the plants come forth, to bring all the treasures out of the earth, to hop between the heavens and the earth, everything. But don't forget the other things I mentioned about the beastly civilization that creates it, who becomes so immodest, kunu qiradatan khasi'in, that it literally thinks that it's just a slightly smarter monkey, that it's a dog-eat-dog world. So in conclusion, brothers and sisters in Islam, for tonight's lecture, we have tried our best to explain 2 of the major signs of the hour. One of them is the sun rising from the west, and the other one is the beast of the earth. The last thing we'll say about the beast of the earth is how the beast of the earth will fall. The other ayah of the Quran is the one about Suleiman. The beast is currently also using the jinn, or I should say more specifically, the Antichrist. The Antichrist uses the beast. Now, according to my teacher, Imran Hussein, he understands that the Mensa'a is not the staff of Suleiman. It's the power that Suleiman had over the jinn and over the natural world to perform miraculous feats. And that Dajjal has now gotten a hold of that power, I'm saying, because of his technological abilities. I don't know if he gets those technological abilities from the Mensa'a. That could be very well true. But that since Dajjal operates in a world very similar to the world of the jinn, the unseen, he has actually fooled the jinn into thinking that Suleiman is still alive and that he is Suleiman, the Jesed on the throne. And so they continue to work for Dajjal until a time comes in the future when that power, the Mensa'a of the Asa, runs out. Now, I'm going to add to Imran Hussein's theory in that I believe the power that will run out is the natural resources of the earth. That the beast will no longer be able to survive in a world where all the oil, the natural gas, the uranium has been depleted. It will no longer function. And at that point, the technological world will collapse all over the earth because it will no longer have resources to consume. And when that happens, the Shayateen will immediately know that Dajjal is not Suleiman. And when that happens, they will no longer work for Dajjal. Now, I have to connect this back to Jack Parsons. And he's only one example, guys. If you dig hard enough, you're going to find so many. Look up Francis Bacon, guys. Look up Francis Bacon. Very important in the Enlightenment. Very important in the scientific advancements of the world. Look up his connection to ritual magic. Okay. But that currently the reason the Shayateen work with Dajjal is because they think he's Suleiman. They can't see that Suleiman has died. And so because they can't see, they continue to work for him. And so that is how Dajjal communicates with the godless people of the world who use him to get all the technological advancements that he has to offer. Basically, the Shayateen become his messengers. Until a day comes in the future when he actually manifests as an actual human being, when his days are like our days. Okay? And when that happens, when the resources of the earth fail and the beast fails, well, then Dajjal is basically helpless, guys. He's just a human being without any abilities. And that's why Jesus is going to get rid of him just like salt melts in water. If you read the hadith about how Dajjal dies, Jesus simply has to breathe and he goes away. Because, guys, once modern Western civilization loses the beast, loses the technology, once Israel loses the technology, once the Antichrist no longer has those abilities anymore, everyone's going to see him for what he is, which is a total fake, just a giant magician, that he actually cannot make it rain. He needs the technology. He needs the beast. He doesn't know everything about everyone. He needs the cell phone. He needs the servers. He needs all the technology. So that is going to be how he loses. And then to get rid of him is just like you get rid of any other human being. And so the mission of Al-Mahdi and Isa to get rid of Dajjal and his followers will be very simple. In fact, by then, Dajjal's followers will have become so lazy, because that's exactly what technology does. It's one of the ways it harms you and me, is it makes you stupid and it makes you lazy. So lazy that some people just sit all day with technology doing everything for them. It washes your clothes, it cooks your food, it thinks for you, it does everything. That the real believers who are going to gradually remove themselves from the beast, they're going to have such fortitude from their fasting and their prayer and their non-dependence on technology that for them to fight the armies of Dajjal is going to be nothing, absolutely nothing. And it will be just like when the Muslims fought the Persians and the Romans. Their societies had spoiled them so much that when these Arab people who could fast every day if they wanted to and live on dates and water could just mow them down, literally mow them down. I'll end tonight. I'll bring this ayah of the Quran up next week because I really think it seals the deal. But it's the ayah of the Quran that really illustrates everything I told you guys tonight about how Allah will eventually cause a technological world to emerge on the earth, and then in one day he'll remove it. And these disbelievers who thought they were so powerful and thought they were so wonderful are going to lose everything right before their eyes. Just like in Surah Al-Kahf, when the two men are arguing, the one righteous man and the other man who's making shirk, and then in one day Allah destroys his garden. So there's a very beautiful ayah in the Quran that should give all of us hope because it's a very difficult time to be alive as a believer. You're being marked by the beast, and you're being persecuted by Gog and Magog and Dajjal, and life is not going to get easier for us. But that we should all have hope. And this ayah of the Quran, I'll bring it up next week. Or actually, maybe I'll just post it in the WhatsApp group. Anyway, we've gone on really.
Real quick.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
We just like see it real quick.
Yes, but I don't want to take up a bunch of time. Okay, you guys ask some questions now, and I'm going to look for it. I hope I gave you all something to think about tonight.
Alhamdulillah, yes.
No questions? No way.
I just want to see the ayah. That's it.
I actually came a little bit late, and I apologize for that. My internet went going in and out, but I took a few notes on the last things you said. Let me just make sure that
You are not allowed to be late. Because you take notes, and that's important.
Yeah, inshallah, I'm gonna if Zargam was able to record this successfully, I'm gonna rewatch the whole thing and take more notes.
It's a very interesting class, today's class.
When I came in, I was like, wow, you're really talking about like all this. Like, I can't believe the one class I missed like the first half. I was mad.
Well, the first half probably made most of you guys frustrated because I think it's the one sign that we all want to think is literal, but in reality, it's probably not, which is the sun rising from the west. Even for me, it took me a long time to digest that one. I was like, no. NASA says polar shift, and like, no, the sun's definitely going to rise from the west. And then I realized that no, it's not. Though, as we always say, Allah and His Messenger knows best, right? It's certainly possible, guys. I just feel like it's certainly a big contradiction of the Quran if it ever does. No questions?
So I have a question. So there is a possibility that the sun could rise from the west, or like, is there a possibility?
Well, I'm just telling you guys, look, okay? Allah causes the sun to rise from the east, okay?
Yeah.
You, disbeliever king, you cause it to rise from the west. There's something very implicit in that statement, guys. What's implicit is that Allah does not cause the sun to rise from the west. Okay? He doesn't. Not that He can't. Don't understand that from it. There's nothing in here that says Allah doesn't have the ability to. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that He doesn't. Ever.
Yeah.
Not only that, but we have the other ayah in Surah Al-Rum where it says that there is no change, tabdeel, in the creation of Allah. Now, that doesn't deny the idea that there are miraculous events, guys, okay? But usually miraculous events are attributed to prophets, okay? Prophets cause, through the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, miraculous events take place. There's nothing in the sign of the sun rising from the west that says a prophet does this, that like Jesus supplicates and then the sun rises from the west. No relationship to a prophet whatsoever.
Yeah, I never thought about this. And most Muslims think that the hadith is like literal.
That's okay. Remember, guys, we don't want to demonize our brothers and sisters for having this literalism about Quran and Hadith, because remember, what was the purpose of literalism? To preserve things, okay? But we said that the principle of usul in interpreting Hadith is that if there's something in the Hadith that is impossible, like illiterate people reading, or absurd, like flying donkeys, And remember, we would never deny that Allah cannot create a flying donkey. It's just absurd to think that he would. Then we should think about what the Prophet said. And that the idea that we should relegate all knowledge and understanding of the Quran to just what the Quran says and not all of the other information around us, like history and our observations and science and everything else, is to really do a disservice to Allah telling us in the Quran to think.
So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm still looking for the ayah while you guys ask the question.
Okay, so I was just doing some quick thinking for last 2-3 minutes, and I'm trying to connect what you were talking about with Dabbatul-Arid and sun rising from the west, and combined with the technological beast that is consuming the earth and all of us and our intelligence. And I was
remember,
thinking,
it speaks to you and it harms you.
Yeah, right. So I was thinking, with the whole sun rising from the west thing, and isn't there passages in the Quran that allude to possible life on other, like in places other than the earth, such as angels and the divine, maybe even physically on other planets? This may be throwing it out there, but what I'm trying to, I guess, in my own way, try to understand is there is a lot of scientific articles and information saying that it is very, very likely that humans will be able to colonize Mars within this century and be able to live there. And I think at some point I remember reading that the rotation of Mars is different than that of the Earth, in which if you were to live there, every morning you wake up, the sun would actually rise from the opposite end from Earth. So it would, when you wake up, it would look like it's rising from the west. So I don't know if that the hadith that says that the sun rises from the west, if that was supposed to happen on Earth, or if it was implied
Yes,
that it
guys.
only happened.
All the signs happen on Earth. There's
so
nothing in the Quran or Hadith about us ever being on anything other than the Earth. In
then that was just far-fetched.
In fact, if it's not clear enough for you, I want you to go back to the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says, "Inni ja'iluka fil ard khalifatan." So Allah is going to put Adam on the earth as a khalifa. He does not mention some other place.
Is there any significance into specifically calling where we live Earth? Like, is that ever imply that there are other places that can exist, that people or other things can exist that aren't on Earth?
Yes, I mean the Quran does mention the seven heavens, and I think it also mentions the seven earths. Okay, but these are, as I understand it, dimensions of space and time. So the universe is multi-dimensional. Okay, like there is a dimension that we all live in, the days which are like our days. Then there's the dimension in which the malaika live in, the dimension in which the shayateen and jinn live in, which we can't see. There's the dimension in which Dajjal exists in, because he exists in a day which is like a year, a day which is like a month, and a day which is like a week. Okay? Those are all dimensions of space and time. What is their nature? What are they like? There's no way for me to understand that, because I don't exist in them. I don't have access to them. Okay?
That actually makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is actual scientific data and information that illustrates that different dimensions that you could end up getting lost in if you like fly straight into a black hole, where like 1 hour or 1 day there is equivalent to, like, I don't know, 50 years here. There's so much information and theories on that, so that's definitely not foreign.
True, but I will be very careful at this point in history of trying to interpret the Quran and Hadith on speculation about the future. Okay, like deal primarily with what your current reality is, not what we think we might do in 50 years or whatever, because it'll lead you astray. Because in reality, one of the things that the Quran says we don't know is what's going to happen tomorrow. any number of variables could prevent all the things that science says we're going to do from happening. You guys understand that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Including exploring Mars and everything else. And I'm not going to say everything I want to say to you tonight, but I'm just telling you guys, anything that comes out of NASA, you should be extremely skeptical of. I'm sorry, not anything, everything that comes out of NASA. But my goal is not to convince you of the untrustworthiness of NASA during these classes. That's a related but totally separate topic. But NASA is not an organization that is going to help you understand the Quran any better. I hate to break it to you. All right, guys, I'm having a lot of trouble finding this ayah. I know what surah it's in. I know about where it's at. It's a very beautiful ayah. I'm going to have to post it in the chat later or in the WhatsApp group. But I will do it. Don't worry.
Inshallah.
And I'll try to post it with a comment. Anyway, we need to wrap this session up. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم ربنا زدنا علما. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا الأشياء كما هي. اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. Okay, anything else posted in the chat if you have a question, comment, or concern. Other than that, thank you all for coming. We'll see you next week for the class on the mountain of gold and the melhama and the dukhan, the smoke.
Sheikh, there was one last thing.
Okay, please post it in the WhatsApp group because I don't have any more time to spare.
Okay, I'll just ask for the homework, inshallah.
Okay, I'll post in some things for you guys to look up. Inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. All right then.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Sheikh.
Baba.
All right, you're gone. Oh, yes. Assalamu alaikum, Wahab. I'm going to pause.